wages, housing, the cost of education, and then the macroeconomic picture as well. It's easy to see why our generation feels so screwed over.
Iona Bain is a writer, speaker, broadcaster and author, and has written a book called Own It, How Our Generation Can Invest Our Way to a Better Future.
I think the key difference these days is not between the haves and the have-nots, although I do think that's still an issue. It's, for our generation, the difference between the have-helps and have-no-helps.
Talking about this generation and the younger ones and kind of the financial position they find themselves in versus previous generations. Mm-hmm. Why I think you're the person to have this conversation with us is, I know you from your blog, which, when did you set that up?
2011.
I feel like you were like the first, if that makes sense, of like the influencers or the ones in my demographic anyway.
Yeah, when I first started blogging, it was seen as quite amateurish, something you did from your bedroom. You couldn't turn it into a career, and it wasn't taken seriously at all in the financial media. And I really wanted to change that, because I think even then I sensed that the internet was going to be a game changer in terms of giving people a voice and a platform. And the conversation about millennial money was happening in the mainstream media, but it was being conducted by older people, and we weren't being involved, and that just didn't seem right to me.
And look at you now. It's funny in a way, because it feels like YouTube is sometimes not taken seriously. It's just something I do in my bedroom, but it's giving people a voice and bringing new people to the forefront. And maybe we were talking about politics earlier and the influence there, and I think we're seeing a bigger shift towards digital creators and even having political influence now. But yeah, you've been online a long time then. So since 2011 and to now, and my personal experiences, but maybe this is guided by my audience, people seem more switched on to their finances now than they were in previous generations.
I agree.
Do you think that is the case?
Absolutely. I think what has changed over the past 10 years is that people no longer will automatically say to me, I'm terrible with my money and there's no hope. What people say now is, I'm aware that there's room for improvement, but I'm working on it. Now, you will still get a minority of people who will self-identify as being crap with money, but I think more and more people realize it's an essential life skill, and that there isn't that same kind of pride that I think used to be very evident around being bad with money. It's bizarre in our culture. We tend to say we're bad with money and not think it's something that we need to work on. And I think that is changing thanks to the internet and the fact that you can access that information more easily, and it's no longer the preserve of ultra rich, ultra educated people anymore.
It is crazy. I'd never really thought about it, but people did wear it like a badge of honor of like, oh, I'm terrible with money.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of the people in my life who I come across who has never been like that is Jeanette Manrara, the dancer on Strictly, who sometimes is a presenter on Morning Live, the program I'm on. And whenever I see her, she says to me, Iona, I've just set up a junior ISA for my daughter. Iona, I'm reading this book on investing. And she's so switched on to her finances. And I realize it's because she's Cuban American. And clearly within that culture, there isn't any shame in wanting to improve your financial situation. And I think we're starting to have those kinds of influences in the British financial ecosystem, which I think is really healthy.
Where do you think it's coming from, like these influences?
You mean the sort of influence...
In Britain, yeah.
Yeah, the influence to want to improve your relationship with money. Well, it's that international component. It's perhaps being exposed to more international influencers and commentators. If you watch American content, there are lots of pitfalls with that, whereby you can pick up quite a one-sided idea of what the world of finance looks like, because we all know the American financial system is very different from the one we have in the UK. But I think one advantage there is that there's a confidence among those commentators and influencers, and there's a belief that we can all get to grips with this. We might not have degrees, we might not be financial experts in the traditional sense, and yet this is a subject we're allowed to own. And I think that attitude is becoming more and more prevalent in the UK, and it's becoming prevalent in communities and among groups who in the past might have gone, that's not for me. And that's really, really encouraging.
Yeah. And I think you've got these combinations as well of like the auto-enrollment structure in work has forced people to invest essentially.
Yes.
And now they're engaging with those and thinking, where's my money? And then also say 07, 08, this financial crisis put a whole generation off investing, where they were like, I don't trust financial markets anymore because the banks are crooks. But then they've probably seen the biggest wealth generating opportunity pass them by in the last 10 years. My mom was like, I'll never invest because I don't trust it. And then 10 years later, she's like, holy crap, like if I had have invested, I would have done very well. And it's, you know, like these people then step into the ring a bit.
Yeah, I think there is cause for hope, whereby my book tries to outline the case for investing as an act of practical hope, because that's what our generation desperately needs.
Yeah.
And this nihilism that we've seen in recent times as a result of negative headlines, and undeniably, you know, poor economic outlook, and information overload, thanks to the internet, it can contribute to this feeling of nihilism and gloom. And yet, if you invest, you are not only making the better future for yourself and your loved ones, but hopefully for society and the planet as well. And I think, you know, your mum having that change of view is really fascinating, because it's almost like there's this understanding that if you decide not to partake in this system that we have, however flawed it is, it's just an act of self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Because you can wait for the change to happen, you'd be waiting a very long time. And I think millennials have finally understood this after 13 years. No, we cannot wait for the government to make the housing situation better. No, we can't wait for our financial system to be more equitable. We just have to get involved. We have to get started. We have to figure it out as we go along. It's not ideal, but if we just opt out altogether, then the only people we're harming is ourselves.
Yeah, massive. Let's look at it then, because there's a narrative that exists that it's never been harder, or this generation, when I say this generation, and maybe I speak to millennials, which is my generation, and then the younger generations, don't have the same easy ride that maybe their parents have. I think
that's a controversial view.
Well, I'm not saying it's my view, and we're going to discuss that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to acknowledge, you know, this is the topic we're going to explore. Can we start by just looking at the arguments for that being true? So, and what you think about them. So the first one would be, say, wage stagnation in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yes, completely. And it's not just the fact of wage stagnation. It's also when you compare that to the cost of housing and how much of a deposit you need now to get on the housing ladder, and how it is becoming increasingly important for you to have family wealth in order to acquire an asset as basic as a roof over your head. And so that's the key problem. It's not just the fact that incomes haven't gone up spectacularly, it's the fact that they just haven't gone up to keep pace with housing. I also think education and the cost of education has been, if only a psychological burden for our generation, but nonetheless, it's important to understand just how much that does weigh on millennials. This feeling that if you consider your student loan as a graduate tax, nonetheless, it is still a tax that our parents did not have to pay.
Plan 2 is horrendous.
Exactly.
7% interest. I'm seeing people paying. You can earn 30, 40K a year, pay £200 a month, and the thing goes up.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's a 9% tax. It's national insurance again, you know, like it's big.
Completely. And if all that money is being taken out of your pay packet, you know, before it even reaches your bank account, it's easy to see why our generation feels so screwed over. I think wages, housing, the cost of education, and then the macroeconomic picture as well. So if you look at the past, 15 years where interest rates were incredibly low, there was no incentive for our generation to save money. And there was also, relatively low inflation, but it just feels like at the point where millennials would want to get on the housing ladder, start to settle down, start to build wealth, interest rates went up at exactly the wrong time. And it feels as if, we just can't get a break with mortgage rates being as high as they are for so many of us who've scrimped and saved to get our first home, and then wham, all of a sudden mortgages are costing what they're costing at the moment. It just feels like, we just can't get a break.
With regards to like the housing situation currently, and like a lack of housing and a lot of people going homeless. I was watching a documentary the other day about shipping containers and people are actually buying shipping containers to live in. This is something that previous generations didn't have to worry about, like the not availability of housing. I don't think people in 20, 30 years ago were living in shipping containers.
And I think that will become more and more apparent to the older generation as time goes on, because I feel like there's this disjoint between, you know, the vox pops, the kind of media representation.
Yeah, what's a vox pop?
Sorry, what's a vox pop?
A vox pop. Well, this
Shit
is actually...
yourself then when that went off.
Fire alarm.
That ejects you from the building.
I'm glad you picked me up on that, because it's a bit of telly jargon, which basically means when you are watching TV and you see a reporter going out onto the street asking people for opinions, that's a vox pop. I think it's short for vox populi, as in voice of the people. Bit of Latin.
Yeah, I did Latin. I know Vox's voice.
Excellent. So when you see vox pops, or when you read comments below the line on newspaper websites, which you probably shouldn't do too often because some of the comments are completely demented, but when you get that kind of opinion from the older generations about what the situation is like for younger people now, you know, it can come across as being incredibly heartless at times. It's this feeling of, well, if only we just stopped spending our money on all these silly, trivial things, then we would be able to get on the housing ladder. And yet the example you just brought up there, I think if more older people were able to see that reality for themselves, they would go, actually, things have changed. And in fairness, that the reason why I say there's a disjoint is because, you know, I just think the way that the media represents older people's opinions is very different, actually, from the older people that I know in my life, like my parents, you know, older friends of mine, who are all incredibly compassionate about the problems facing younger people, who feel that as a society, we've let the younger generations down, and would be in favour of political solutions that sought to rectify that. But unfortunately, the perception that we have is one of the older generations being pitted against the younger generations. And it really winds me up, because I just don't think that's going to solve anything.
Yeah, and the papers love it. The politics does it, doesn't it? It's like they listen to these very vocal minorities and say that represents everyone. Like you say, though, you know, every person 50 and above in my life is like, it was a lot easier for me to get on the housing ladder. They had their own struggles, though. You know,
completely.
The 90s, people getting repossessed all over the place. Yeah. That doesn't really happen like that anymore.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the world of banking was a wild west.
Yeah, you were ripping people off.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. Mis-selling was rife. Yeah. And of course, mis-selling still happens today, but I think the regulation is a lot tighter than it was. But also coming back to another key macroeconomic trend that's really adversely affected our generation, in my view, is quantitative easing. Yeah. The idea that if you pump lots of money into the economy to get it started again, that, you know, the Bank of England was arguing that this has actually been a boon for younger people. And I said that was an interesting take in my book, because it is, right? I mean, I just don't know how they can say that with a straight face when you look at how much it's inflated the price of assets like housing and shares, which disproportionately benefits older people and is to the disadvantage of younger people who need that much more upfront capital to be able to acquire those assets. And it's just created within the economy this virtuous circle for older people who've got assets and this vicious circle for younger people who don't have assets, which is why I say in the book that I think the key difference these days is not between the haves and the have-nots, although I do think that's still an issue. It's, for our generation, the difference between the have-helps and have-no-helps.
Here's the thing. There's only really a few ways you can boost your income. I mean, you could change job, but the other main route is to start building a business or a side project. That's how my YouTube channel began, alongside my day job and delivering Chinese takeaways. If you've started or want to start a side project, then you'll need a website. Now, I like Hostinger because of their AI website builder. It's really easy to use, and it's great value for money. You can spin up a website just like that. You just have to describe what you would like your website to look like, and Hostinger's AI generates a professional looking site in seconds. Their AI is really impressive. You can ask it to create things like SEO friendly copy, a logo, and they've got an AI heat map to predict user behavior as well. Hostinger is perfect for side projects, e-commerce brands, or portfolios. You can get a website up and running plus a free domain for £2.99 a month. And if you use the code MAKINGMONEY, you'll get an extra 10% off. That's one word, Making Money, and there's a link in the description for you.
Do you think then, so there's another argument that says, well, that, maybe from these very vocal minority that get pitted against each other, that money's all going downhill one day anyway, because I'm going to die and you're going to inherit it. But do you think that it's a case of, I might not get that until I'm in my 60s when it's almost too late, say my parents' generation in their 20s and 30s were better off than I am in my 20s and 30s?
I think the issue of whether our generation will be one day incredibly wealthy thanks to inheritance is it's up for debate. I mention it in the book because I think it is a valid reason to get to grips with investing now, because if that money is coming your way all in one go, then you're going to be completely floored by having that sum and not knowing what to do with it potentially, unless you have already had experience with investing. So I think it's a good argument for getting to grips with investing, but you certainly shouldn't rely on that money. For starters, as I joked in the book, you have no idea whether your parents are actually going to leave you that money or not.
Well, if it goes on care homes.
Yeah, true. I mean, the cost of care is getting greater and greater. And in my experience, people are not very good at talking about this within their families, because money is still a taboo subject for so many people, and it can elicit these very strong emotions.
Yeah.
And so even if you do have those discussions within your family, the amount that's being passed down to you by that stage in your life, in your 60s, is it going to be enough to solve all your financial problems? No, I don't think it will be. And so I think it's a pretty, sad state of affairs that basically millennials' best hope of having assets is to just wait until mum and dad die.
Yes, and it's not a conversation you want to have with your parents either.
No.
Like, you don't want to be like, so what are you going to leave me when you're gone? Like, it's not really something that's in a...
Yeah, so it's like, I was speaking to a financial advisor the other day and I asked this inheritance point and he said, it always comes too late and it's never enough.
Yeah.
And if you look at someone's life as like a curve, a trajectory curve, if they get the help in their 20s or they get onto an asset in their 20s, it's like that.
Yeah.
If they get that in their 60s, it's like they're done, they're at the end. And, you want people to be able to build assets in their 20s and 30s to leverage time and compounding and just to live a bit, right? You don't want to be like, you only get to live your life when you're 60.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And the other issue as well, that I don't think gets enough attention is equity release. More and more older people using that to try to have their cake and eat it, if you like. Still be able to live in their own home, but not have to sell it and downsize in order to release capital and to have a good quality of life in retirement. In my view, there are so many problems with equity release, not least that if you don't discuss it with your family, then they could get a really nasty shock when you do pass away or go into care, and suddenly that inheritance you thought you were going to get is going to be much smaller.
We spent it.
Yeah.
In Benidorm.
all the cruises and the margaritas and strawberry daiquiris.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's interesting because there is sometimes an attitude that, look, it's my money. I worked hard for it. I earned it. My kids shouldn't expect an inheritance from me. And it's fascinating seeing these different attitudes around money. And I understand where they come from when they're kind of born of a conviction that your children need to stand on their own 2 feet. They need to earn their own income. They need to find their own way in the world. I totally get that. But I think in the case of inheritance, if you're not discussing that with your kids and your kids are basing their plans around your inheritance, then it's just going to cause such an almighty conflict within the family if you don't talk about it.
But do you think that people base their future on inheritance? Because I know from my family and just from people I know that when someone passes away and siblings tend to fight over the money and there's always discrepancies and who owns the house and who gets this land and the will says this and the older sister's kept it and she's done something dodgy and it's never simple. It's always whenever there's money, people suddenly change. People been siblings for 40 years suddenly just stop talking to each other or fall out over the money. So do you think this is a British thing or do you think it's just a natural human thing that people don't really talk about inheritance and they don't really know what to do with it?
I think money can turn people's heads and it can poison relationships, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have got a dysfunctional housing market, because home ownership and your desire for that asset to grow in value, it brings out so many of the venal sides of our character. And that sounds really harsh, but as someone who owns my own home, I know within me the psychological shift that took place once I became a homeowner. I wanted to protect what I had, and I wanted the value to keep going up, and anything that could jeopardize that or threaten that, I can see myself becoming quite hostile to, which is another reason why I'd be fascinated to see whether or not the younger generation's support of things like wealth tax is going to continue into the future as well. Because again, we could get to that point where just when we've got our own wealth, it's at that moment that we decide, it needs to be taxed. But actually, maybe that happened about 20 or 30 years too late for it to really make a difference in terms of intergenerational fairness.
Yeah, like I was looking at unfair taxes recently. And so like the UK has one of the highest inheritance tax rates on the planet at 40, but we collect less money overall than countries that have 20% inheritance taxes because we give generous upfront breaks. So a lot of households with $1 million don't pay it because if you've got a married couple, they can pass on the house. And then past 10 million, it just falls off to a cliff because you just buy farmland and invest in obscure stocks. So actually it's only the upper middle who pay it, which, you say 3 million and people start going, well, they're loaded. And they have got money, but it could be, we bought a house in London for the right price at the right time and all of this stuff. And it's like, inheritance tax is the most hated tax after beer tax. And people who don't pay it hate it, but they don't understand that they won't pay it and that the people who should be paying it also don't pay it. So it's like that hatred supports a system that is unfair and that could benefit the lower to middle earners, if that made sense.
Completely.
It seems like there's a lack of understanding, like you say, around it, and it penalises the people it should be helping.
But there's a general lack of understanding about the tax system, and I get that completely because I hate talking about tax. There are not that many aspects of personal finance that I actively dislike having to talk about. But whenever it comes up in my work, I allow a big groan. It is a mess. It's a total mess. And trying to explain things like the marriage allowance on TV is, it's something that requires me to go and lie down in a cold, dark room afterwards because it's just so complicated. And we had to use 2 jars of sweets to try and illustrate how it worked. And you have to really take your time over it. And you can see, like, when I talked about this on Morning Live, you could see everybody like really concentrating, bursting the veins in their foreheads, trying to get their heads around this concept. And I was thinking, it really shouldn't be like this.
It should be simple.
Absolutely. Tax is a fact of life. Okay, I understand how it has mutated over time, if you like. But every time the budget rolls around or the autumn statement or these big economic events, I'm always just so disappointed that we don't take that opportunity to simplify it and make it more understandable for people who have to pay tax. Let's face it, it's not something we can opt out of unless you're super, super, super rich, seemingly, but we all have to pay it. So, I think the government, HMRC, all those bodies owe it to us to make it understandable.
As a demonstration of the complexity, if Iona's book is all of the writing on law, so every crime, every punishment is that book, the tax law is 30 of Iona's books. So there's 30 times more legislation and rules around taxation than there is around murder and every single crime.
Why is it so complicated?
It's ridiculous. But anyway, let's get back to the topic. So my son is 10 and I talk to him about money. And I think the example that I give of a shift in attitude towards money amongst younger people, his generation, is I go to him, I've got no money, mate, I can't afford it. He goes, well, just use your phone. He's got this abstraction away from what money is. But how do you think the digitalisation of money and people and our lives being more digital, how has that bled into like money habits? You were mentioning all sorts of things around loud budgeting and things like this.
Where do you begin? It's a vast subject. I think it's a double-edged sword. I decided with my book to focus firstly on what digital tools are available to young investors now, because I'm a realist. I understand that that is the most likely route that younger people will take when they're investing. I remembered reading an op-ed about how the world of Bitcoin and Dogecoin and, GameStop and all these crazy investment trends was turning young people's heads, and they needed to go back to the old-fashioned way of investing and just phone up a stockbroker and place an order and do it that way.
Yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah, it's like,
Someone from the FT write that.
Yeah, yeah, possibly, not naming names, but I was like, yeah, I might as well get out a mangle to dry my washing. I just thought ridiculous. You've got to accept that it's a Pandora's box, and that we have to work with that now. So one of the reasons I wrote my book was to try to explain what can be quite a dizzying online universe of options, whether it's robo-advisors, digital wealth managers, free trading apps, whichever option you pick, it's likely to be online. Now, on the one hand, that has made it incredibly convenient and easy to start investing. But on the other hand, perhaps it's become too easy. And I think we've seen over the past few years what can happen when people have got basically zero barriers to investing, which we know is still quite a complicated, fraught process that you need to be informed about if you don't want to lose life-changing sums of money. And then at a more basic level, when it comes to just managing your money day to day, it doesn't help that the wider economy is pushing all of us towards using digital money exclusively. And that undoubtedly makes it easier to overspend, easier to borrow, and harder to delay gratification. And younger people are no longer having that basic grounding in the finite nature of money, unless they are given physical cash. And there's interesting research which shows that actually, even today, with the rise of digital money, it's a myth that you've got to immerse children in that world so they understand it. It's a bit like that kind of wider myth that, we've got to teach children how to use iPads and iPhones at the earliest possible age because, hey, this is the world we live in now. It's like, actually, it's doubtful that immersing children in that world is really beneficial for them. And it's similar for digital money. If you're not giving them physical cash and saying, look, it's real, it doesn't grow on trees, to use that old-fashioned phrase, and it is finite. And you might think that you can borrow extra, but there's always going to be a bill at the end of that. And the problem is that the wider digital economy that we have now doesn't want to talk about that bill. It's not in their interest. It's not in the retailer's interest. It's not in the financial company's interests. They all have a vested interest in making us borrow more and believe that actually digital money is limitless. And if you want to spend more, go for it. And unfortunately, we know that works against a lot of the basic principles of sound long-term financial management.
Yeah, Apple Pay is the devil in that sense.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, I refuse to have it. Credit card, I refuse to have it. Like these things that I can't trust myself. So I had Samsung Pay or whatever it's called on my phone. I had to take it. So I was just tapping everywhere.
Really?
But sometimes I'm like, I don't have my wallet, I won't buy it. But I always have my phone. So if you always have your phone, you're always going to buy it. So I prefer to just have my card. I'm like, I don't have my wallet, I can't buy it.
That's interesting though, because you have had to come to that realization of your own accord, and you've had to set those boundaries and limits within your own life.
Cards, yeah.
Yeah, but what I fear is that if you're older and more mature, perhaps you have got that ability to self-regulate. When you're younger, we all know, because we were all young once, we maybe still are technically, even when I was at that age, to have that and resist overspending on my debit card was a massive ask. I don't know how a young person today can do it if they can literally buy whatever they like at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's crazy.
I didn't resist. I mean, I get the impression that you're probably maybe more sensible than me, but like I was a hot mess at that age, and it was still it was like an analog world in that sense of like the spending there was a few barriers, wasn't there?
Yeah, and you had credit cards marketed to students.
That's what I got mine in university.
They hit your door at 18.
That's it.
Like, literally came through my door. It was like, oh, I've never had any money in my life, and here's a credit card with £1,000 on it.
I mean,
that's sweet.
So many people.
And then they increased my limit.
Yeah,
and then I ran that up as well. I was like, sweet.
Yeah.
And then you get like, you don't understand how to pay it, and you get a default notice at 18, and that thing stays with you for 6 years. I can see how people in their young just get into a mess, run up a phone bill, don't pay it, credit card, blah, blah, blah. And then 6 years, that carries with you.
Completely. And whenever I talk about this subject, my motto is learn the easy way, not the hard way. That's what I always urge young people to do, because there are so many people, within our generation, and indeed yourself, you've learned the hard way what, partaking of that can mean for your finances. And the problem is that we just do not have enough education around what the consequences of overborrowing are.
Yeah. Okay, so can we talk about the good side of the digital experience though?
Yes.
Well, you might not think it's good, but what do you think of, say, like people like me, like influencers, and that access to education or information? Let's not call it education, that might be a stretch. The access to people like me chatting about money online.
I think it is a healthy development overall, because ultimately the mainstream financial media has tended to discuss issues that affect older people. I remember when I first started out in financial journalism, when I tried to get young money on the agenda, I was told an awful lot. Our readers don't care about this stuff. And I was always incredibly skeptical about that, because you cannot hope to attract a new readership if you just keep writing for an older audience. So try it and see. And secondly, a lot of your older audience actually care more about their children and grandchildren than about themselves. And they want to try to figure out what helpful advice they can pass on. Now, I think some of the financial media have cottoned onto that idea, and there's a lot more coverage aimed at younger people over the past 10 years, which is great. But is it reaching those young people? And are we finding enough, appealing, down-to-earth ways to talk to young people? Not necessarily. So the online space has got much more of a healthy range of opinions and information for that generation. What I fear is that anybody and everybody can set themselves up as an influencer. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you find it incredibly frustrating that for everyone who's trying to be balanced and informed and helpful, you've got so many more that are just in it to make money.
People that do well, people that I see the mainstream media picking up and saying, oh, this is someone, just because they've got a bit of audience online. And then I see the practices that they're doing on YouTube and being like, this is in breach of sponsorship rules. You're blatantly taking money behind the scenes here to promote this. I know you are, because I've had the same emails. And these are people that are hiding behind the guise of, I'm one of the good guys. So it is frustrating.
And I won't lie, I think for a period of time, that made me have a much more negative perception of the finfluencer space, because I would see exactly the same practices as you did. And I felt that if there were no brakes on that, then anybody, once they got to a certain level, would have their head turned and would think, well, if I'm going to keep up this level of popularity, I've got to do X, Y, and Z. And also, I've had it in my career where certain corporate opportunities come along and they are incredibly difficult to turn down, because you're thinking, well, accepting that could be the difference between me paying my mortgage this month and not paying my mortgage. So I get why people do fall into that trap. But I think as time has gone on, I feel that I'm not the only one who has that dismay. And there are lots who realise that actually, if we want to try to help that next generation, we can't just turn away from that space and say, no, it doesn't matter. It's full of, hucksters and sharks. That actually the most important thing we can do is to try to be within that space ourselves and to offer a voice of reason.
Yeah. My little brother's 27 and he just had a birthday party a few weeks ago, and loads of his friends came and said, oh, we love your podcast. Like we listened to it. It's really helpful. It really helped me so much. And some of my younger cousins are like, oh, Damien's channel, I watch this channel. It's so useful. I get it with some of my friends, but I found more my brother's friends and the younger generation, they really find this kind of content useful, and learning about ISAs and bonds and stocks and all these things. My brother's investments are much more balanced than mine. He's got his ISA sorted. He's got all these things. I'm just heavily into risky things.
Right.
So I do feel like the younger generation are definitely benefiting, like our millennials, Gen Z, they're benefiting from the YouTube influencers.
I think you've got to give them credit as well. As in more credit, as in they know how to sniff out a shark or someone who's, I don't know. I think people are cute to scammers and they kind of know when someone's genuine or not.
And I think, this perception that younger people are just all invested in ultra risky assets is a little bit wide of the mark. I think it's possibly because we, again, coming back to what I was saying earlier, we're very internationally influenced. We possibly believe there's more of that American, go big or go home culture in investing. We think there's more of that in the UK than is actually the case. If you look at the data from the big investment platforms, they show that younger people are more cautious investors than you would think, that they're making more sensible decisions than you'd think. So I think we need to slightly bust that myth.
Do you find that the younger generations are more likely to share stories about money online?
Yes. And they are much less buttoned up than the older generations about this.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the whole movement to try and get people to talk about their salaries, particularly in the context of the gender pay gap, is a fascinating one, because I think the older generations would see that as the most gauche thing ever.
Oh, you can't do that.
You can't go.
That's not proper. Yeah. That's not the way it's done.
Like as a salesman, we used to get our pay slips out every month and slap them on the desk.
That's sales, because that's commission. Though.
You could learn a lot from salespeople. We get a bad rep, but honestly, we did well, and we earned money, and we all knew what everyone earned, and no one was getting taken advantage of, and the women could earn as much, if not more, than men. Women earn more than men.
All my sales jobs, women made more than men. 100%.
If you're a woman out there and you want to earn a load of money, go work in sales, because they just do great. They do great. And unfortunately, there's probably all sorts of negatives to being a woman's salesperson, but the money was always equal, and it was if you sold, you sold. But anyway.
No, that's my second career sorted.
Yeah. That idea of sharing wages, when people are, oh no, that was always alien to me, because I've always shared what I earned with my colleagues.
Yeah, and I think there's a feeling as well that the old status quo has somewhat gone out of the window, and you just have to make up your own rules. You have to make your own way. You have to establish success on your own terms. And I am all for younger people, not necessarily saying, screw having a house, screw having a family, screw all those traditional milestones, just saying screw it for the sake of it. That's not necessarily the way to go, but certainly saying I'm going to have success on my terms, and I'm not going to think I'm a failure just because I don't own my own home by the age of 30, because I don't have a family, because I don't, have the most amount saved into my pension. I mean, apart from anything, you have to let go of the perfectionism around pensions, because for me, it's about the art of the doable. I mean, I feel very strongly that those targets that are thrown out there by the pensions industry are a lot of the time ridiculous. Like, if you're 30, you should be saving 15% of your salary into a pension, because that's what you should do. Halve your wage for the ideal pension target. It's like, well, what if you're trying to buy your own home? What if you're trying to get through the cost of living crisis or pay off a loan? These one-size-fits-all rules are really unhelpful, and they contribute to this feeling among young people of, well, what's the point? I can't save 15%, so I'm not
I haven't got 100 grand in pension by 30, so
they're like, screw it, might as well go to Ibiza.
Exactly. I totally get that, but I think that the best way to approach this whole area is to say, I'm doing what I can, and the fact that I'm saving anything into my pension is a miracle, and we should applaud young people who just stick with their workplace pension and don't opt out. My attitude is positive reinforcement rather than, more the carrot rather than the stick. I think that's the best way to go. So,
are we actually more screwed than our parents' generation?
It depends on your definition of success. And screwed. I think in some respects we are definitely worse off in terms of housing, wages, savings and pensions. Yes, we are worse off. But in terms of
memes, we're good.
Memes, we are bossing
emojis, gifts, sorted.
All the important stuff.
Risky investments, sorted.
In terms of more flexibility, more freedom, more rights, arguably, certainly as workers, and the ability to define success on our own terms, then in some ways I think we are better off than our parents' generation were.
Yeah, the whole COVID point, look at what our generation did. We got told not to leave the house, and the country still ran. And I think we've become pretty good at turning negatives into positives, to the point now where the whole of the world is more flexible in its work, outborn out of the worst event that could possibly happen, basically.
Yeah, and if I think about my career now, I am working less and earning more than I was pre-COVID. I have really good work-life balance, and I get to do something that I enjoy and that has purpose and that utilises my skills. And you might think, well, surely everyone should be in that position. But I feel very blessed, and I do think that a lot of people are actually a little bit better off than they think they are. And it's because they do have options, and the most important thing is to just understand and educate yourself about what those options are. So it's one reason why I wrote the book. When it comes to, if you want to get on the housing ladder, I accept it's not for everyone, but if you do want to do that, there's a lifetime ISA. Now, it's not going to solve the whole problem. It's not going to be the complete solution, but it's going to be a help. And if you don't know about that, then you're one step behind already. So there are little things and little hacks that you can do along the way that can help you achieve certain goals. And also for younger people, they know that they're not necessarily going to have the same job for life. They're not necessarily going to have a really, paternalistic employer who's going to take care of them, give them a fantastic pension, give them all these benefits. They know they're going to have to fend for themselves a lot more. So how do we do that? Well, we talk about our financial challenges and we look for ways to improve them, and we get ideas, we crowdsource. And I think what's really interesting is if you go on a forum like Reddit, you can check out Wall Street Bets and see a lot of crazy stuff on there. But if you look at the personal finance community on Reddit, UK personal finance, it's incredible, A, how big that community is, and B, the fact that, what people are doing there is that they are seeking this crowd wisdom in terms of what they could or should be doing with their finances. And yes, you're going to get, some blowhards on there who make out that they have all the answers. But generally speaking, I think it's lovely that people just want to offer their input and their advice. And in a way, yes, okay, I think people should become informed and understand how taxes work, how investments work, speak from a position of being informed. But I don't ever want to make out that people are not entitled to an opinion about finance just because they didn't study business and economics, because I think that's incredibly elitist.
Yeah, in the same way of like financial advice, in this whole idea that you should be a qualified advisor to have a valid opinion. I actually think sometimes the advice industry has been the most predatory aspect of finance for a long time.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, the fact is, it's in financial advisors' interest to say, we're the gatekeepers here. Yeah. Only we can tell you what to do with your finances. And there was this concept that I heard about when I worked in financial trade media, because I worked for a publication aimed at financial advisors back in the day. So I spoke to them every day, got to know them. And the best ones were those who, weren't so much financial advisors, but they were people who had real emotional intelligence and were kind of more like life coaches in a way.
I know some good financial advisors, like you said. And what they say is, I'm a planner. I help people plan towards their goals. I look at their whole life and say, you want to retire here and you want to be on a boat and you want to do this, let's get you there. Rather than my job is to go, I'm going to pick an investment for you, because that's just a load of nonsense, really, because that's a simple thing to do. And it's picking the investment and wrapping it in an ISA is not the valuable bit that they do.
Yeah, and I think I sort of unpacked a lot of that culture within my book. So when I talked about, the evolution of investing away from these traditional gatekeepers in the city, and the fact that financial advice and investing was really the preserve of the wealthy and the educated and an elite within society, how technology came along and completely broke that system, mostly for better rather than worse. But then also how it came along and broke the model of active fund management. Now, that's not to say that I don't think active fund management, I think that active fund management is dead. It's not. I think it still has a place. But certainly as a financial journalist, I became very aware as the years rolled by that, these big fund houses have got big budgets to woo the media, to get them to write very positively about active funds, to ignore passive funds and how much cheaper they are, and the fact that actually it's very rare to beat the market consistently over a long period of time. It was in the industry's interest to kind of dazzle journalists into ignoring that stuff and to just concentrate on a few active funds here and there that did perform well for a period of time, until they didn't. And if you take Neil Woodford and what happened there.
Gosh, I heavily invested in the Neil Woodford.
Oh, did you?
I did. It scared me.
That was my first ever investment.
Yeah, basically. It scared me off the market for like a couple of years.
That's such a good example of
it was
why.
Going well, and then it just...
They pumped it into the floor though. They continued to advertise it as it was collapsing. It wasn't.
I mean, so many things went wrong there. And it is an extreme example, but nonetheless, I think we cannot ever go back to that world. And, you know, like I said, when I was a financial journalist, I used to be, you know, wooed by these fund houses in order for me to write positive pieces about them. But in my book, I make it very clear that actually with passive investing, you know, there is an alternative there.
There's something I want to come back to. That you alluded to it a second ago, but I've read it. You talk about it extensively, and it's this idea of today's generation and these milestones that we have that have come from a previous generation. And you often talk about like compromise in finance. Can you just kind of share that and what you feel?
This is a slightly controversial view. I do think that younger people absolutely have a point when they say that the milestones that their parents achieved are no longer there for younger people, that it's far harder to achieve those same milestones. So I believe, as I said before, that you should define success on your own terms, but that does also mean that you will have to compromise on some of those idealized goals that you might have inherited, say, from your parents or your grandparents. And I know this because I feel that there is no chance I could ever have got the same type of property in the same kind of area that my parents did, you know, at my age. So I had to compromise. I got an ex-local authority place in London. I'm a leaseholder. If I had a choice, I wouldn't be a leaseholder. I don't like the system. I don't like the fact that those charges can go on into the future, that they can rise at any time. I understand that there's some government action on that now, but it's just not a great system. You do feel like going back
feudal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You feel like you're going back to the Middle Ages. But overall, I felt like that compromise was worth making so that I could get on the housing ladder. And I think too often younger people, you know, they're not prepared to make a decision and be okay with it, even if it's not ideal or optimal. And I know that's controversial to say that, because that can often be misinterpreted as you haven't managed to get on the housing ladder, you haven't managed to save or invest or put more into your pension, therefore it's your fault. No, it's you making a choice. And sometimes that choice means that you are going to have trade-offs in your lifestyle, in your quality of life in the here and now. That's just a fact of life. And if you can't say that out loud, then basically you're saying that young people can never hope to have any kind of long-term wealth. And I just don't think it's right to say that.
Do you think as well that we need to look at what we consider wealth? Because as an example, right, my nan, she owned her own home from quite a young age, but did she ever go to a full moon party in Thailand? And did she ever party with tea on a boat in Poland and you know, sink a load of Ukrainian lads at beer pong?
We did.
I did. I absolutely scored. They didn't know what the poor things like. They were like, come on, let's see what you've got. They don't realise I went to uni because I just sunk them like. Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. But,
wow,
anyway,
it's like the beer pong world championship.
It was on a boat in Poland with some.
Yeah, I play better when I'm drunk as well. So like, you know. I can do that, you know, we did.
That is an unusual skill to have, to get better at something the more drunk you get.
I think it's like conditioning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I spent 3-4 years of uni and then living in a house share for 5 years where we did beer pong pretty much every Friday night. Champong was like when we've been paid. Champong. We used to get a bottle of champagne or like Cava or whatever and fill up the red cups with that. So we had the champong on payday. But anyway, I digress. What I'm saying is, that to me is wealth. That like I got experience, and my nan, she never travelled anywhere. She didn't like pasta because it was plain. I'm like, you put sauce on it, nan. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, she's like, oh no, just plain white stuff. I don't eat that. Foreign muck or whatever. Like she'd have meat and 2 veg every night, and it's like, yeah, she's got an asset, and people, she might tell me that I should be on the property ladder, but it's like, have you lived like I have?
It's fair to say that, you know, the older generations, like the horizons were more narrow. The world was much smaller and the opportunities were far fewer, especially if you're a woman. I mean, when my mum was my age, or more or less, you know, she couldn't order around in a bar, It's quite incredible to think how in the space of, my mum's lifetime.
She couldn't order around.
Yeah. I give that example in my book as just a contrast between the opportunities that were available to her. I'm not saying like the be all and end all is whether you can order.
Yeah, screw your house, you at least you get pyrotechnics.
It's an important right, nonetheless. I think to be able to.
It speaks to social freedom and like your equal standing that you should be able to walk up to a bar and order a drink.
Yes, but my attitude is I think that a woman like me should have the right to do something like that, but also the right to own her own home if she wishes. It's about choice, and it's about the choice between having an asset like a home or, enjoying things more in the here and now. Now, personally, I don't think it has to be a, black and white choice between the two. The point is that for me, to take an example, I feel I'm at that stage now in my life and my career where I can do more things that I enjoy, where I can go on trips and travel and enjoy life a bit more. And it is partly because I scrimped and saved when I was younger, and I was able to work towards a place where now I have choice and I have options, and I can do that, because I did some of the hard yards when I was younger. And I think the problem is now, if we take away that choice from younger people, then I fear that the, consumer economy that we have, experiences, digital nomads, all these seemingly attractive options, that sometimes they can just be a consolation prize for not having the things that ultimately will mean that you're in a much more secure position in the long term. I think, for instance, if you get to retirement and you don't have your own home, you are just going to be much more worse off, because so much of your housing costs, so much of your pension income will be eaten up in rent. And that's not something that we discuss enough. And I think the point is, we're not saying if you get to that point in life and you're having to pay rent, you have failed. It's a case of no, but you need to be aware that that's what's going to happen.
With the world being more open now, I mean, I was a bit like the opposite of you. I always wanted to travel, Thailand, America, wherever, my whole life. And like, whenever I got money, I'm like, yeah, holiday time, let's go travel. But do you think now that the world's more open, I know a lot of my friends are moving to Thailand, Dubai, and they're like, oh, I can get a house with a pool in Dubai for like $2,000 a month. Whereas here, I've got to pay $2,000 a month. I get a tiny little shed in the end of someone's garden in London, in like central London. So do you think people are moving to like Thailand, Dubai, Spain, thinking like, one of our producers lives in Spain now. Do you think people are thinking, well, I don't need to buy a house here. Like, I might just move out the country in 20 years and go get a mansion build my own chateau in France somewhere. I've been thinking about that. Like, you can just buy some land and build your own
That's
house.
another wealth.
Some people thinking like, I can just have loads of fun and like not worry about leave England in 20 years and go buy a house for half the price somewhere else and have a pool in the
I mean, that could work out.
Views.
Yeah, no, I think look, that
might be my plan.
That could work out. But there is again always a risk that 20 years down the line, that option looks nowhere near as appealing as it does right now.
Yeah, you want to be near your grandkids and like your friends, and you don't want to go retire in Thailand. I do think again though that is another level of wealth that we have in our society that future generations in flexibility, mobile work. You work.
I can work from anywhere.
My mom, like. People now, you go, oh, where are you going on holiday? I'm just going to Spain. To my mum, that was another world when she was a kid.
Yeah.
Now it's like standard.
I'm just popping up.
Do you know what I mean? Pop to France for the weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw a thing on Instagram. Two friends wanted to meet up, and they were like, one lived up north and one lived down south, and the trains were so expensive. They're like, let's just go meet in France. And then they flew to France, and it was cheaper than getting a train to meet in between London and wherever, because the trains are so expensive.
It's a whole other conversation.
That's what. But like, like you've got the option to go meet your friend in France, or rather than taking the train up north because it's cheaper. So
we have that flexibility over work and location.
Completely. What I will say is that I think the greatest asset you can have is freedom. And I think for me, that's my ultimate goal when it comes to the balance between work and life. We talk a lot about work-life balance, and I think it's definitely an overused phrase. And yet, post-COVID, I can never go back to the way I was pre-COVID.
Same.
And I feel that one of the few good things to come out of that whole period is that our generation was told, your jobs are non-essential. Unless you work in the NHS or in retail or those kinds of jobs, your job is non-essential. Stay at home, make it work, figure it out, do what you need to do, but otherwise you're on your own. And I think we all turned around and went, okay, my job's non-essential, is it? Well, in which case, I am going to make it work for me.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I don't want to work as many hours in an office with a boss who is a mini dictator or a David Brent or just makes my life hell, I don't have to.
You worked at the same place I did.
How do you know? But we've all had those experiences. I mean, I had those experiences throughout my 20s. That's one reason why I am now probably never going to go back to full-time employment. Never say never, but I am probably the most committed freelancer that you will ever meet. Because for me, being able to control my working life is the most precious asset that I can have. And that's what I worked really hard for as well in my 20s. It wasn't just to buy a property and all the rest of it. It was also so that I can work anywhere that I want to. If I want to go visit my parents, I can do. If I want to take a day off, I can do within reason. If I want to have my life so that I can concentrate on my core priorities outside of work, that's possible. That's true freedom.
You think the COVID pandemic changed a lot of people's approach to investing as well, apart from not just working? Because I mean, I'm never going back to the office, hopefully. I've even closed like a deal on a boat in France. Like we were on a boat going to an island, and like I had a client and I just closed a deal and he's like, it's very loud. I'm like, I'm on a boat. And then I turned on my camera. He's like, oh, you're on a boat. And so like, it's the freedom to work from anywhere I really like.
That's a real boss move right
I know,
there.
right?
I closed a deal on a
salesman
boat in
move.
France.
If you're billing, it doesn't matter.
I put it on Instagram. It's a great, so I might show it again. It was such a great, so it was like a speedboat and I'm just there like pretending that I'm with a background and they're like, it's very loud. And I took off the background.
You had a fake background on a speedboat, like in a library.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, it sounds very loud.
Not
I'm on a boat. Yeah, it didn't work.
Just there like this.
But yeah, I feel like my brother got involved in investing in the pandemic. I got heavily into crypto and other things in the pandemic, and like a lot of people made a lot of money from investing. Do you think just because we're at home, you've got the internet there, you're like, the younger generation's like, oh, let me see what I can do with this digital money? And
completely, it was an absolute game changer, because for the first time, young people, they were stuck at home. A lot of young people did have spare cash because they weren't going out, they weren't commuting.
Get a bit of furlough.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Furlough, you weren't allowed to work.
You can't spend it because you can't go out anywhere.
You're saving hundreds of pounds a month on travel.
Yeah. So you know, what else are you going to do other than try to figure out how to make some extra cash and do that through investing? So I think it was a real watershed moment. And I think a lot of the crazy trends that we saw in that period reflected that strange time. And now things have settled down a bit more. We've obviously been through the cost of living crisis. So people no longer feel as gung-ho as they once did. Mm-hmm. They're not taking the same kind of risks that they were when it seemed like money was free, right?
Yeah.
And in the US, you know, the stimmies that, you know, people got in the post, it was like monopoly money. Well, we might as well invest this. What else are we going to do with it? And that's what drove a lot of those, you know, quite extreme events in the stock market. But we have settled down now. And I think hopefully younger people kind of had a bit of a baptism of fire through that period. And I talked about, you know, these sort of trends in my investing diary, how they can turn anyone's head. I mean, I got addicted to these free trading apps. I was checking my portfolio multiple times a day. My parents had to stage an intervention at one point. Step away from the phone, you know. But it was good to learn about those things for myself in that way. And now I would say I'm a much more sensible investor. You know, I practice what I preach in the book. But I think we've all got to just get on with it and do it. And sometimes, you know, learn things the hard way. I know earlier on I was saying...
I was going to bring that up. Yeah. You said something, you can learn the easy way or the hard way. My dad always said that, like when I got suspended from school one day for getting too good grades and working too hard and being amazing. It didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't my fault. I got set up. But I got suspended. My dad's like, look, you're going to learn the easy way or the hard way. You seem to like the hard way, but which is not always ideal, but it makes more of an impression and you'll remember.
Yes. So, you know, to try to dig myself out of a hole and not make myself seem like a total hypocrite, I do think there's a difference between learning about borrowing and learning about investing. I think with investing, it is inevitable that you are going to lose money as an investor. You cannot prevent that from happening. You cannot guarantee that that won't happen. So you will have your gains, you will have your losses. you will have to take that on the chin and just learn to be okay with that. You've got to learn to be okay with the risks of investing. Whereas with debt, I feel that is a whole set of risks that you don't need to take on, that you can learn about the easy way. Whereas investing, you just got to start, do it, try to stick to the sensible rules if you can, and not get too hung up if you don't perform as well in certain months or years, because that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like the Laffer curve where it's like you think you're a genius, you get a bit of gains, everyone thinks they're Warren Buffett, this is easy, then they get spanked by the market, and then it's like, okay, I'll just buy an index fund. I think everyone needs to go through that journey.
Yeah, and so long as you're investing money that you can afford to lose, I know that sounds a bit of a strange concept, doesn't it? Only invest money that you can afford to lose. It's like, what, you saying that like this money here,
I don't need
which I've
it.
worked really hard for, I'm happy for that to just, as you said, get completely lost in the markets. But in a way that does help to keep you grounded when it comes to investing, because otherwise, if you are investing, I mean, that's why we say you've got to save and invest. I'm team saving and team investing. Have savings, but also invest. And the money that you invest is not money that you're hoping will mean that you can get on the property ladder within the next couple of years. It's not money that you need to have for a really important goal in your life. I say in the book that I invest because I have dreams, because I think the financial industry gets too hung up on the need to have goals. And fundamentally, today, I think it's really hard to have set goals. I'm going to do this by this age and this by this age. Like, life is unpredictable. I had no idea I'd end up being where I am today, like 10 years ago.
COVID, no one saw it.
No one saw, exactly, So the way I like to think about it is that I have dreams, and that means things I would love to do. Might not be entirely in my control. Things might come along and knock me off path. But if I can achieve those things, I'd love to. And I came across an amazing quote by Gloria Steinem, who said, dreaming is a form of planning. And for me, having dreams doesn't mean I'm just being some utopian idealist. It means that I am hoping that my future will be better and that I can do some amazing things. And I am investing in the hope that if those dreams do happen, I've got money there. Yeah. And that's why I invest. Like I said at the beginning, if investing is an act of practical hope, then so long as I'm investing, I have hope for my future, and I have hope that dreams will happen.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Making Money podcast. As usual, there will be a link in the description to download our newsletter, which has a nice summary of today's episode.
And if you enjoyed this episode, you'll really like this one here.